Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 4, Episode 9. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Based on listener feedback, hashtag voteagainsttheincumbent reconsidered the effect that such a political strategy would have on state legislatures all over the country. And the term of art pig slaughtering, the online scam phenomenon that has taken Westerners for over $3 billion just last year alone. How can you avoid such folly, dear listener? Well, I stumbled into the secret. Stumble being the key term there. Thank you all for listening. I do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, if you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5 stars, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Let's make our way.
Act 1, hashtag vote against the incumbent reconsidered.
A buddy of mine who's been on the podcast, he's one of the 4 idiots discuss sports. He reached out to me about hashtag vote against the incumbent, purpose-driven politics. And he raised an issue with me that I hadn't considered, and I find it a glaring hole, a miss, if you will, in the entire hashtag vote against the incumbent movement. And it's the effect that this kind of movement would have on state capitals, on state legislatures. A quick recap of hashtag vote against the incumbent, the logic, the foundation being that given how closely divided we are as a nation on so many issues, given how closely divided the House of Representatives, the Senate is, given that the American people, the American voter, have allowed one party or the other, a majority, control of the House of Representatives, control of the Senate, control of the White House, and been completely disappointed with the ineffectual governance by one party or the other, Republican or Democrat. And given that it seems like by way of policy, by way of outcome, the political parties have merged, there is no substantive difference between a Republican or a Democrat, hashtag vote against the incumbent. It's these people who have been in office for decades that are most problematic in the political system. And the easiest way to get the attention of the political parties, of the candidates, of the donors, of the bureaucracy, it's to start with a methodical, with a public, with a well-understood campaign that the voters are coming out simply to vote out the incumbent. That it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're in support of something or you're against something else, that you're being turned over because the government is not being run effectively. And that until the politicians, until the donors, until the parties, until the bureaucrats, they respond to the will of the people, will continue to turn over these ineffective politicians that hold these public seats. In 6 years, you will have turned over the entire government. If that type of public political movement were to take hold, I believe that politicians, that parties, that donors, that bureaucrats, they would respond to as much. Would they completely change heart? And would they be beholden to the will of the American people? Of course not. Would they begin to respond more effectively to concerns that the American people hold? Yes, they would. The idea that we're going to have some sort of coup or some sort of revolution in this country, to me, is silly. It always has been. It always will be. There is a way that we can have a bloodless coup in this country, and it is hashtag vote against the incumbent. My buddy called me and said, what about state government? What about the legislatures in these states that are completely blue or completely red? What about the level, the degree of groupthink in these very blue or very red legislatures? When you were talking about a blue legislature, you're talking about a California or a New York, a Washington or an Oregon. And on the other hand, you have the very red legislatures. You have the Floridas of the world. You have Tennessee. You have states like Utah or Alabama. If these states with these types of majorities had an even deeper majority for but 1 or 2 legislative sessions. Such a partisan legislature could affect the trajectory of that state for decades to come. In addition, hashtag vote against the incumbent is more palatable on a national level. You are someone in North Carolina and you feel like you are undergoing some sort of political initiative, some sort of political movement that may have an effect on someone in Portland, Oregon, you may be more willing to vote for a Democrat having always voted for Republicans your entire life. Yet within your own state, if it is a majority Republican legislature, how likely, in order to effectuate change in the state of North Carolina, is a diehard Republican going to vote for a Democrat? How would one market such a political movement? How would one posture these types of ideas to people that were so ingrained in either their blue or red partisanship? Many of the successes realized within states, they don't happen overnight, and yet because you've had legislatures that may have been Republican or Democrat for years and years, decades and decades, you can attribute to that political party these successes. So it's difficult when you see things going well in State A or State B, and they've had a legislature that's been Republican or Democrat for years, if not decades. How are you going to convince them that it may be national trends, it may be other economic factors that are creating these successes versus their ingrained, their indoctrinated political beliefs producing the results that they had expected to realize all along? Oh, I've reflected, dear listener. I've thought about this a lot, and I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer at how a movement that appears to me, at least, to be such an easy and effective solution to the lack of what we can all agree is ineffective national governance. It does not translate very well to state governance. It's a much more bitter pill to swallow for people in a state. It's a much harder sell to make to them to vote across the aisle in a statewide election versus a national election. Compound the issue with the fact that many state elections, of course, are coordinated with federal elections. So you're voting for both people who are going to represent you at the federal level, and you're voting for people who are going to represent you at the state level. Does this mean I completely dismiss the idea of hashtag vote against the incumbent? No, I do not. It still has a lot of merit, and I believe it is the only way that the American people can effectuate a bloodless coup in this country to really change the way we govern ourselves. Absent having people go out and learn everything there is to know about the primaries in their states, about the way that they're run on both a state and federal level, having this level of participation be such that it's almost a fantasy that anyone who's working a full-time job, who has a family, can allocate that type of time to commit. It's a big ask for the entirety of the electorate to say, I'm going to put away all other passions and I'm going to adopt politics as my sole, my only extracurricular activity outside of my family, my faith, and my career. Hashtag vote against the incumbent is the most low-maintenance way that I've thought of that people could still live the lives that they're leading and effectuate a change in their political representation, at least at a national level. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to wrestle with all of the complications that my buddy raised in the state legislatures. And having done some research, now that this question has been raised in my mind, many corporations, many lobbyists, they are spending as much time and as much money at the state level as they are the federal level. Limitations on corporate liability, limitations on administrative oversight, tax breaks and incentives. These lobbying efforts and their successes by way of the legislation that's being enacted in these states, These efforts are flying under our collective radar. Fewer and fewer media outlets are covering local politics, statewide politics, the same way that they're covering national politics. Even some of the alternative media sources that will go through and read a bill that's being considered by the Congress or the Senate, there isn't that type of coverage for state legislatures, for state bills. As pressing as I've found our whole discontentment with how the federal government's being run, it may be after my buddy has planted the seed in my head of more significance, of more importance to address what's going on at state legislatures than it is to address what we believe is the problem going on with the federal government, with the federal legislature. It's the problem that we're not aware of that's more impactful and more important than the one that we worry over most often. Right when I was about to make this push, this monthly, if not maybe bi-weekly push to include a piece of hashtag vote against the incumbent, the entire initiative is in question. And now I feel compelled to at least start speaking more frequently, more knowledgeably at least, about what's going on at state legislatures. The problem with that is, of course, doing all the research well enough to find out what the hell's going on in state legislatures. There's only 24 hours in a day, and a man's got to eat. Damn you, Doc. Damn you for thoughtfully listening to my piece on hashtag vote against the incumbent and bringing these glaring issues to my attention. Maybe these Reddit and QAnon and 4chan rabbit holes, these echo chambers, they have some merit to them. That is, you get to just blather on into the void, never having to really respond or listen to anyone thoughtfully critiquing your thoughts, your assertions, your political positions. It's true, dear listener. Ignorance is bliss.
Act 2. How to avoid the pig butchering trap.
I'm on the social medias. I've got a LinkedIn account. I've got a Facebook account. I've got an Instagram account. These are accounts where people will reach out to you, try to correspond with you. I've also been on dating websites, and of course, that's an absolute, a litany, a plethora of messages every day. Mostly, as a man, messages that you're sending out. You get the occasional messages as well. I recently saw a term called pig butchering. This is a term of art that's been used by the media, and its origin is from scammers, online scammers. And the reason why it's called pig butchering is because there are online scammers who are using such sophisticated strategies to bilk people out of not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's called pig butchering because you have to raise this innocent victim up as a piglet into a full-grown pig before you butcher them. The reason I wanted to comment on this phenomenon is because I know that I've been reached out to hundreds of times, and that's not an exaggeration, hundreds of times to be butchered. And the only saving grace that I had was something that I learned very early on about online dating. Before I get into how I lucked into, and I use that word intentionally, purposefully, how I lucked into avoiding these scams, let's talk about the scams themselves. And they are quite sophisticated. I, like many of you, often blame the victim when it comes to online scams. And many victims don't come forward because of that type of shame and social stigma. They feel like, how could I have fallen victim to this scam? As their contemporaries, we look at them and say, how could you have given tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to someone online? How could you have been scammed like this? John Oliver of Last Week Tonight did a story on pig butchering and finally explained in detail how the actual scams work. Regardless of what you think of Oliver, it's very informative. This piece just came out, I believe it was on Sunday night on HBO, so you can go out and find it on the YouTubes. This is a detailed breakdown of how people can get scammed, and again, not scammed in thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. It starts out with the messages that we've all received. These are messages that can come through on our phone via text. They can come through via LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and particularly on dating profiles. Many of these messages have a familiar tone, and they are quite conversational, even if they aren't using the right name. So they're not calling you by the right name. They are inquiring about a situation or a circumstance that has nothing to do with you, that's completely inapplicable to your life. And they often have these problematic turns of phrase. They don't look like they're native English speakers. Now, on your telephone, these may be easy to avoid. You just simply delete the number, you block it from your phone. On social media, particularly on Instagram or Facebook, and on dating websites, they may be a little bit harder to detect. Have I fallen prey to some of those types of messages? Yes, I have. And why do I do so? Because there's that pretty girl's face on the icon, the profile icon at the other end of that message. Now, I'm not the most attractive guy in the world. I don't believe that I'm the least attractive guy in the world, so I know that I can garner some attention from members of the opposite sex. One of the hallmarks, though, of this pig butchering scam is that these profiles, particularly of these pretty women, they are usually international. Specifically created and geared for a North American audience, these are international women. They're from Asia or Europe, perhaps even from parts of the Middle East. I've interacted with a couple of these profiles, not understanding the nature of how they could actually get one to give them money. It's easy enough if someone came out and said, "Oh, I can't make a car payment, I can't pay my rent, will you send me money?" We all would immediately object. No, I'm not just going to give you money. What they do, which is so clever, is they start to cultivate you as a friend. And instead of asking for money directly, they begin to drop these little seeds. They're planting seeds in your head about how successful they or people that they know are doing in trading cryptocurrency. And then it goes beyond just trading cryptocurrency. Once you become interested in the results, the successful results of this crypto trading, they will send you a link and state simply, hey, if you want to start an account and follow these trading strategies, you can begin to make money as well. The John Oliver piece on Last Week Tonight was very, very meticulous in introducing people that even after having gotten a link for a third-party crypto site, went and did investigative work to verify the legitimacy of those sites, sending emails, calling phone numbers, looking at records of these companies' registration in the United States of America, in different states. Well, as you may have guessed by listening this far into this segment, no, those were not legitimate crypto trading websites. The scammers have an extremely high level of sophistication. They have built out these dummy crypto trading platforms simply to get you to give them your money, all while creating fake indices, fake crypto numbers. So you see these crypto stocks going up and down. You see your results being positive and negative. It looks just like a trading website. It's all manipulated. Most people don't realize that they've lost all of their money until they try to cash out their supposed crypto gains, the gains that they see by way of that dummy platform that they've achieved over the course of their trading history. People have invested $100,000, $500,000, $1 million into what they believe is a legitimate crypto trading platform, been given fake results for months, sometimes years, and it's only when that they attempt to collect some of their gains that they realize that it's a scam. So how did I inadvertently avoid such a fate? I never got to any step where I had any type of intimate relationship with someone online absent seeing their face. That is the scammer's Achilles heel, and it is the only thing that kept me from engaging in a more intimate conversation. A couple of years ago, I had a podcast segment with a guest. Her name is Jessica, and we talked about dating in Scottsdale. We talked about online dating. One of the features that many of the online dating apps included, and now you have through Facebook and Instagram, it's the video feature. Disappointed that the person that you've been interacting with online, whether on a dating website or otherwise, is 20 years older than their photos indicate. They are 50 pounds heavier than their photos would indicate. Well, here's an easy way that you can vet people without having to meet them in person and without having to give any more personal information than you have via this online dating website or your Instagram or your Facebook profile. You just use the video feature. You just contact them and you can see them via video, face to face. You can have a conversation. And although virtual conversations certainly don't give you the same indication of chemistry that an in-person meeting does, you at least have the opportunity to see the person face to face, determine if there's enough chemistry that you can meet that person in the real world. I had a woman ask me if I would be willing to use the video feature before we actually met in person. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I'd never used the feature before on one of these dating apps. It worked well. And so I just adopted as much because I didn't feel like going out on a date to find out that the person that I was sitting across from didn't look like what they purported to look like in their photographs and having to spend the money to find that out. Yes, I know you're imagining it in your head, this scammer sitting in some room or some office in Southeast Asia or in some part of Eastern Europe, and they don't look anything like the photographs they're being posted. In fact, they're probably very likely male. So when I would ask to have a conversation, particularly a video conversation with these people, radio silence. And then maybe a few weeks later, they try to re-engage with the same approach, avoiding the fact that we'd had a conversation where I'd asked to see them in person. And I would just reinitiate that request. Spoiler alert, if you're going to watch the John Oliver piece, and I highly recommend that you do, he goes over this in detail, but I can't avoid talking about it because it's part of the scam that is beyond the scam. Now, what do I mean by that? We, as people who are potential victims or have been victims of some type of online scam, believe the person on the other end of the line to be the perpetrator. What Oliver exposed, and I don't think that's been really well understood in the Western world about this whole pig butchering online scam phenomenon, is many of the people who are doing all of this work to scam you have been scammed themselves. Many of these people are from extremely poor countries that went to some sort of facility in Eastern Europe or in Southeast Asia, thinking that they were going to get a legitimate IT job, a legitimate career path to make money, to get out of the poverty that they're living in. And it turns out that that's a scam. And the people who they are now working for just confiscate their documents, explain to them that they're going to be engaged in this online scam at the threat of their own lives, and they better be successful. So the people that are scamming you out of the money have been scammed themselves and are only participating in this guise because they are at risk of being beaten or killed if they don't. It isn't easy to admit that one of the most beautiful women that's come out of Southeast Asia who reached out to me to flirt with me on an online dating app was probably some guy from India or Malaysia who had been, for all intents and purposes, kidnapped into scamming me into believing that they are this beautiful woman trying to separate me from my money. And the only saving grace that I had was the fact that I'd been burned before by women who had scammed me, not so that they could get my money in some crypto scheme, just because they had gained 25 pounds and didn't want to admit as much in their online dating profile. To all the males out there, all the guys out there that are listening to this podcast, the beautiful Eastern European girl or Asian girl, she's not real. The beautiful, wealthy Parisian girl that runs some international import-export jewelry distributor in LA, no, not at all. Not real. That's just some guy who've probably been beaten 3 or 4 times over the course of the last month because he hasn't met his quota from separating you from your money via a crypto scam. That leads me to my last point of this segment. Crypto. You're going to make $1 million in crypto? You're going to be a crypto millionaire? That entire industry is full of shit. Crypto may one day be an alternate currency to government-backed currencies. But folks, it isn't a day that ends in Y in the year 2024, and likely 2025, and likely 2035. Between the legitimate websites and legitimate exchanges that have just been manipulated by the people running the websites and the exchanges, that so-called commodity is risky enough. Now you can't even trust that the exchanges that are established out there are real exchanges and not just vehicles to scam you out of depositing your money with online scammers. All of this is to say I'm excited about the future of the internet and online social media, because the closer I get to it, the more disgusting it looks, and the closer I am to deleting it all, because every single part of it is fake. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.